Okay, can we start? Mr. Wesson, President Wesson, is unavailable for us this afternoon. He sends his regrets, but business requires him to be someplace else. I am Gil Cedillo, and I thank you for joining us at the Immigrant Affairs Civil Rights and Equity Committee. I want to thank the following committee members, Mr. Rue and Senator Price and future Senator Martinez for joining us today. What
happened to the lights?
We like it like this. We're calm, low-key, keep the energy down. I have no idea what happened to the lights. So I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank everybody who's here. We're ready to start the meeting. Are we doing public comment and then consent, or we're going to do multiple agenda comment? Mr. Herman, I see you at the top of my list here. Oh no, that's 115, is that right? 115. You have to excuse me, we have new technology here and we're trying to manage. Okay. So you get a total of 3 minutes, 2 minutes, and 1. There you go, 3 minutes. Mr. Herman, welcome.
Thank you. So as you heard, Human Rights Ordinance. Well, what did Trump say about the Human Rights Ordinance? Let me give you an example. I came into this country when I was 4 years old with my parents, Nuri Martinez. I was 4 years old and I came into this country illegally from Zacatecas, Jose Huizar. What the fuck's wrong with that? I'll tell you what's wrong with that, is that American people are not receiving their service, programs, or activities that fall under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. And you continue to violate based on bias, prejudice, and discrimination against all American people first. I'm going to make America great one day when I go to hell. But as long as I'm an American, I'm going to fight for every American's right to have a job, get off the street and not be homeless, and take every veteran seriously off the street. So as long as you continue to house illegal immigration, as long as you continue to provide services under Social Security for immigrants, as long as you continue to make rules to protect illegal immigrants using LLC, outside law, fuck LLC. Fuck all those lawyers representing DACA. On behalf of Trump, I say fuck you. This is America. Yeah, you can defend a person with a visa, but you should not engage against treason against American people so you can be a scumbag taking the money and having a great life, motherfuckers. Now my general public comment. Just the other day, one of your sergeant of arms on a normal basis likes to threaten us because we're Americans. We speak about the illegal harassment of people from this council like Jose Huizar, Nuri Martinez, who continue to separate us as Americans because of your bias, prejudice,
focus your comments
action
on the subject matter.
On immigration.
There you go.
So why are you housing illegal immigrants before Americans? Why are you putting citations against the homeless, against the veterans who live on our riverbeds on every corner? Because you don't want to spend the money? You're asking to spend money on what? Bigotry by Wesson and you, Martinez, for what? City attorney assistance from the city of Los Angeles, Immigration Affairs? Fuck the Immigration Affairs in the state of California, and I hope Jeff Sessions comes in and cleans your fucking house.
Okay, now we have Patricia McCallister.
Here on item 1, it says that you're requesting the city attorney with assistance from the city's immigrant affairs and civil rights advocate, chief legislative analyst, and any other city department as necessary to prepare and present a draft civil human rights ordinance. One, prohibits discrimination. You are discriminating against everybody that's living on this street. I drive through these encampments. I haven't seen one Mexican, Asian, or Latino land in those tents. You said you're going to intolerance and bigotry that result in denial of equal treatment of individuals. Go down on Skid Row and see what are you doing for them. Not a darn thing. Provide remedies accessible to the plaintiffs. Creates the city of Los Angeles civil and human rights. All of this for illegal aliens. You have no right, and the federal government says this, you have no right to be giving Section 8 and affordable housing to illegal aliens. They crossed this border. I was at the library when the day that you had put out the notice that you were opening up the Section 8 list again. The library had a big sign for illegals. If you don't speak English, you need some help, go to so-and-so room. I was standing there, and one came there and spoke in English. They took her to the room, and they helped her fill out a Section 8 application. She had just crossed the border. So I know what I'm talking about. I get around. You need to, we need this city. We need a referendum
Mr.
on
Chairman,
the ballot. On the
speaker's
ballot.
off topic.
Focus a little bit, please.
Okay, now, over here it says that you won't discriminate. You are discriminating. And also, here, the DACA. DACAs are illegal aliens. The mothers and fathers crossed the border illegally, and they brought those little children with them. Those children are illegal aliens. We have 100 million unemployed in the U.S. and 25 million homeless. We don't need no more children here. Now, we're not even talking about the anchors. The anchors are the 25 million that these illegals have had under the Democrats in the last 15
DACA's not on the
years.
agenda today.
Okay? DACA is in this agenda, okay? What I did was I read you don't have it on here, but I went in and read all of the information on these. There's a link, those numbers, 180086. So DACA is included in here. You want to help the DACA children not get deported, and you want to give them free, it says right here, it says representation for participants of DACA and other illegal aliens. That's in this, people have to go online to read that. Whenever they get these agendas, click those links of those numbers, and you'll find out what this is about. This is about DACA. We don't need to be housing DACA, educating them. Their parents have to go back, and they have to go back with them, and those 25 million illegal aliens. You go online and type in homelessness in Los Angeles, homelessness in Anaheim. Anaheim, they've got 2 miles, and the guy almost took a plane.
Mr. Herman?
Riding through
It's
there.
unnecessary.
We need
Please
housing
respect
for American citizens,
Ms. McCallister's
not
time.
illegal aliens. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Percy? Herman, please. Ms. Percy? Third time. Ms. Percy? Okay, we're going to move on to Rob Quan. Rob Quan will be followed by Scott Doyle and Joseph V. Aya.
On item number 1, I want to applaud the Immigrant Affairs and Civil Rights Advocate for advancing an ambitious human rights ordinance. Most important is his prioritization of a strong and accessible enforceability mechanism. A law is only as strong as it is enforceable. For item number 2,
Can you hold the time for a second, please?
I'm having it. Yeah, I can't hear you. What's wrong with this mic? Fix the mic.
Yeah? Okay. Please, again, I'm sorry.
For item number 2, amending the Justice Fund contract. While I support the Letters of Representation program, I hope this council does not give way to the temptation of actually taking money already allocated to the Justice Fund. Even if this begins as a small-scale pilot program, this should bolster, not chip away from the Justice Fund. For my general public comment, we're sitting here another month, another meeting, and again we see this committee sidestepping any kind of focus upon LAPD's ongoing cooperation with ICE. It's Jackie Robinson's birthday, his 99th, and his words capture this tension. Life is not a spectator sport. If you're going to spend your whole life in the grandstand just watching what goes on, in my opinion, you're wasting your life. Instead of advancing a sanctuary ordinance or even producing a report highlighting concerns about LAPD's policies, what we get from most of our council members is grandstanding. This council had no problem circumventing the chief of police and the police commission with Measure C last year when it offered political cover from the Police Protective League going into a primary election. I ask, does this council only feel compelled to leave the stands and join us on the field when it faces the unmistakable undue influence of money in politics? Thank you.
Scott Doyle.
Good afternoon. My statement first on item number 1. When tackling a problem, it makes sense to have clarity about short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. Particularly in a crisis, it is critical to determine what can I do quickly and with the greatest effect. The laudable objectives of the Human Rights Ordinance are clearly mid-term goals. There's much to be said for this report, but as you have acknowledged in these chambers, there are a lot of hoops to jump before this can be enacted. It requires funding, it has to be considered by multiple committees. To have teeth, there must be penalties. Penalties require authority, which involves settling questions of jurisdiction, due process, and liability. In short, it's going to take time. Meanwhile, you are ignoring the kind of ordinance that would cost nothing, which has clearly been vetted and researched, and which would provide immediate protections for our immigrant communities. And I want to know why. If it is the word sanctuary that is tripping you up, call it an Immigrant Protection Act, call it anything. But do not continue to do nothing about the toxic mix of local law enforcement and federal immigration that on a daily basis is putting immigrants at risk. Collusion from local law enforcement is the biggest driver of detention and deportation, and you are doing nothing about it. Your police department is doing business with ICE, and you are doing nothing about it. Briefly on item number 2, let me repeat, and I'm paraphrasing a local UCLA attorney, local law enforcement and local criminal justice practices are the single largest driver of detention and deportation. And nothing on your agenda addresses this core problem, including this proposal. I'm not in a position to comment on the merits of the letters of representation. What I can say is this: it is designed to defend immigrants threatened by possible collateral arrest from ICE. 20 years ago, that may have been the biggest threat faced by undocumented immigrants. This is no longer the case. Far more often, the problem is targeted arrest. When they have your name, when they are looking for you, when they have an outstanding deportation order and a printout of every brush you have ever had with local law enforcement, no letter, no app is going to stop them. How does this target end up on their backs in the first place? More often than not, local law enforcement puts it on them through unnecessary arrests and bookings, through unnecessary sharing of information, and by criminalizing immigrant communities and people of color generally. Again, you are doing nothing to stop this targeting when it is fully within your power to do so. Thank you.
Joseph, you have 2 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Joseph Vigela, Director of Policy with CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights of Los Angeles. In regards to item number 1, we look forward in working with you all in trying to make that a reality, and we appreciate all the work from staff. My comments are more targeted in relationship to item number 2. CHIRLA reopened its legal services in 2012 when DACA was created. Since then, we have helped more than 20,000 individuals with illegal consultations and legal representations. And CHIRLA has also connected with more than 150,000 individuals each year in relationship to any question related to immigration. While we appreciate the time and effort that staff has made in this particular item, we continue to have severe concerns in regards to unintended consequences of this item. We've been part of different meetings to go over the merits and the proposal, and let me go over some of the concerns that we have. One of them is that it will provide a full sense of protection. As I mentioned, right now, for CHIRLA Legal Services, once we enter into a contract with an individual, we provide what is known as a G28, which is actual representation between a client and an attorney. Once we have that G28, we have access to that individual in a detention center or any other settings that is appropriate. In addition to that, this has an opportunity to open up for bad apples to prey on our community. Lastly, we feel that there is gaps in regards to the One Justice Fund that this committee should assess and figure out how the city can fill those gaps. Our recommendation is to also look at the model of the One California program that was created at the state level, in which had legal services, both affirmative against deportation or detention, but it most importantly had an outreach and education component to also make sure that our communities know about their constitutional rights and know about the legal services. And with that, we continue to have severe concerns in regards to this particular item, and we urge this committee to table this motion. Thank you.
Ms. Fire H. Ms. Fire H. Times, Ms. Fire H. Let's hear from Rosillo B. Rosillo B. Rosillo B. Third time. Sarah Eggers. Sarah Eggers. Sarah Eggers is not here. Let's hear from Walter Nichols. Walter Nichols is not here. Brian Ellardin. 1 minute.
Good afternoon. I work in the arts. I am not a professional activist, but recent events have made me a professional activist. I have the great privilege of living in East Los Angeles, and I'm going to disagree with some of the people who started off this committee, the Trump representative and his collaborator. But I think we can agree on something. That is that justice should not be arbitrary, and it should not be cruel. And one of the ways that we in Los Angeles, we can't solve the national immigration problem necessarily. We can't necessarily agree on who should be let in and how many people should be let in. But we should be able to agree, Republican and Democrat, everybody should be able to agree that we need some sort of ordinance that makes sure that immigration policy is not cruel, that we can protect people from unnecessary cruelty in immigration policy. Please separate local law enforcement from national, federal immigration enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Tessie Borden. Followed by Felipe Cáceres.
Good afternoon to the committee. My name is Tessie Borden. I'm commenting on behalf of CLU, Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. On item number 1, I think one of the things that we would really like to see in this ordinance is language protecting congregations that are offering sanctuary in the city of Los Angeles by making them exempt from building and planning regulations and zoning. I think that there has been some conversation about this, but we don't see this yet in the draft, so we wanted to make sure that the record reflected that we're very much in favor of that. Thank you.
Thank you. We've done that with the homeless. Señor, ¿cómo está?
Bien. It's good to see you. So I'd just like to thank you for your effort that you've been putting in up to this point, everyone involved in this committee, but I would like to say that I was raised by this city. I was raised by the services and the education that this city provided me. And I was taught by many giants that are sitting here in the room and inspired by them. And so I would just like to say that we're in a moment here that we need action and we need something tangible to be able to tell the community every day. I'm talking to community members that are terrified, and they're terrified because they hear things in the news and then they hear that the city is doing something about it. But when I tell them I don't have anything to show you that will protect you, that scares me. I've worked my entire life to try and make this city a better place, this country a better place, and I think what we're doing right now is un-American. We're not protecting people that need to be protected.
Thank you, Felipe. Herman, please. Graciela Lopez for general public comment. Please join us.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Graciela Lopez with the California Immigrant Policy Center. I'm here yet again to ask all of the leaders in the room to put forth a strong local sanctuary ordinance. We've been here for more than 6 months now, and we still haven't moved forward. We'd like to, continue to place the pressure on all of you. As time delays, more and more communities and more people, more families are being torn apart. Additionally, should the proposed letters of recommendation program be enacted, funding for that program should definitely not come out of the LA Justice Fund. Given that this will be a pilot program, I feel that money should be allocated from a completely different source. And lastly, I've heard the prior comments from other community members. We are not here today to play Oppression Olympics. We understand that all communities, Black, U.S. citizens, LGBTQ folks, and homeless, along with the disabled, all deserve protection under the law.
Thank you, Graciela. That concludes our public comment. Herman, thank you for cooperating with us today. We will now move to item number 1 for consent, right?
Would you like us to read it into the record?
Yes, please. Let's do that.
Item number 1 is a motion, Cedillo, Wesson, Martinez, requesting the city attorney, with assistance from the city's immigrant affairs and civil rights advocate, chief legislative analyst, and any other city department as necessary to prepare and present a draft of civil and human rights ordinance that, 1, prohibits discrimination, prejudice, intolerance, and bigotry that results in denial of equal treatment of any individual. 2, provides remedies accessible to complainants. And 3, creates the City of Los Angeles Civil and Human Rights Commission and any other supporting unit to investigate and enforce violations of the proposed ordinance.
Okay. Colleagues, moving number 1 on consent, so be the order. Let's move to item number 3. Can you read that into the record?
Item number 3 is a presentation by the California Community Foundation relative to the Justice Fund and related matters.
Dear friends, please join us.
Good afternoon, honorable members of the committee. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to come and provide what is essentially an update on thus far the successes of what has been an unprecedented public-private partnership between the City of Los Angeles, the County of Los Angeles, and the philanthropic sector here in the region, which includes Weingart Foundation and California Community Foundation. Our hope is to share a little bit about what's been provided in terms of support, the focus of that support, but also share some brief points around what are some unmet needs that actually exist as the Justice Fund has gotten into motion and begun to really have an impact. So just as an update, the collaboration and public-private partnership was able to raise $7.4 million, which will go out over the course of 2-year grants, which have already been made, and my colleague Rosie Arroyo will provide an update on that. CCF is serving as the fiscal sponsor and program manager for the LA Justice Fund. As a reminder, the LA Justice Fund singular focus was to help remedy the lack of access to legal representation for individuals in removal proceedings. And in developing this program, we focused particularly on that population, which was defined as individuals arrested or detained by immigration officials and now subject to removal proceedings and or having final orders of removal. The Justice Fund itself serves specifically residents of the City of Los Angeles and County of Los Angeles, with support from the county and philanthropy as well. It focuses on individuals with highest levels of need, which, for example, include individuals in households with incomes below 200% of the federal poverty level. It's also a fund that focuses on priority populations. And as an example of those populations, not only is it on detained individuals in removal proceedings, but also ensuring that we're focusing our need on individuals who are head of households and have families and both spouses and children that depend on them. Unaccompanied children who have a number of needs. One of those, more importantly, being access to legal representation. You may have all seen in the news this past week that the Supreme Court's opinion was that children under our laws are actually not entitled to have access to legal representation in immigration proceedings. So that was a huge blow and actually only elevates the importance of a focused justice fund. But just an example of some other prioritized populations are our veterans. There are a significant amount of veterans who have served our nation who are actually undocumented or have never been provided a full path to citizenship and are being deported or not being afforded the right to have access to legal counsel. So in terms of how the funds have been put into place in terms of a program design, what has gone out, who has been funded as part of this program, I'm going to invite my colleague Rosie Arroyo to just give a quick summary of that.
Great, thank you, Efrain. And one of the things that we wanted to share is that since the fund was established, we've been working very closely with funding partners to ensure that we can build a strong infrastructure for the program and also ensure that this is a well-conceived program. There has been a lot of work in the last year to really work and build the infrastructure and help us, which got us to this point. So as Efrain mentioned, the goal of the LA Justice Fund is really to help expand legal representation to individuals who, vulnerable communities who are subject to removal proceedings. Part of the funding strategy that was adopted is really focusing on supporting nonprofit legal service providers that have the experience and expertise in providing removal defense services. So a portion of the resources was dedicated to help expand and bolster existing removal defense providers. The second strategy, looking at helping to also build and expand the capacity of removal defense providers. There's a number of organizations that over the last years have been developing and building their removal defense legal resources. However, with additional resources, they're able to hire additional attorneys and be able to expand the work. So, and then the third strategy, just understanding the limited capacity of the nonprofit legal service provider field. There's a strong need to also partner with pro bono attorneys to ensure that we can scale services and expand and make these as available as possible. So in terms of eligibility for eligible nonprofit organizations, the fund was seeking to support qualified nonprofits with at least 5 years of experience providing legal services, specifically under removal defense, and are currently also receiving or having a federal state grant for legal services. The grant terms were over 2 years. And I will now go over some of the special grant conditions that were established as part of the LA Justice Fund. So as you may recall, the LA Justice Fund also does have some restrictions, so based on city and county policy. Under county funds, individuals who have been convicted with a violent felony are ineligible to receive legal services, and that is also the same under the use of city funds. In addition to having a violent felony, this includes for the city's portion of the funds individuals that have had a conviction for a crime of human trafficking, child abuse, domestic violence, or pimping. So these individuals under the city, policy are ineligible for legal services unless the legal service provider is able to determine and make an affirmative finding that the person with the conviction has a justifiable extenuating circumstance and potentially meritorious claim for immigration relief, for defense of removal. And so just, moving on to the next slide in terms of, who were the funded organizations that the LA Justice Fund supported. In total, the LA Justice Fund, as Efrain mentioned, there was about 7.4 million that went out this last November. And the funds went to a total of 16 organizations, all listed here in the presentation, that include organizations with a strong track record and experience providing legal services and removal defense services. So you have a full list of services and organizations listed here.
In total, there were about 17 organizations that received funding out of 38 that applied.
Yes. Yeah, and so 16 are specifically nonprofit legal service providers. We are, the 17th organization includes the Vera Justice of Institute. They are a nationally nonprofit legal organization that has a robust experience and a track record in managing large-scale national legal services programs. They were also a founding member of the New York Immigrant and Family Unity Project Coalition, through which it led efforts to analyze the need for legal services in New York. And they launched the first program, legal service program, in 3 sites in New York State, and they're currently in process of conducting a comprehensive evaluation of that program. So our partnership with Vera is really to help support the data collection and evaluation of the LA Justice Fund, understanding that we must efficiently use public resources and philanthropic resources. We are making sure that we work with our partners to develop a robust program evaluation. This will include the collection of monthly data collection from nonprofit legal service providers. CCF will also be collecting quarterly narrative reports from organizations to track, trends, progress, and challenges in the implementation of the program. Then this will then turn into, quarterly reports to city and county and all the funding partners, along with an annual evaluation of the LA Justice Fund program at the end of year 1, and then one comprehensive evaluation at the end of year 2. And then just, one last thing I wanted to share in terms of the activities that we've been supporting since the program was launched in November, just to share that there has been a lot of activity. CCF, once the policy was established by city and county, we immediately released an RFP that went out on July 10th. That RFP was then followed by an informational webinar that was held on July 13, where we had close to 80 participants attend the webinar. From then, CCF, along with our partners at the Weingart Foundation, did all the due diligence and review of all the grant proposals for the LA Justice Fund. And in November 27 of last year, the LA Justice Fund grants were awarded. Then following that, we had our initial kickoff grantee meeting on December 4th to help on board all grantees. And since then, the last 2 weeks, we had an additional grantee convening to provide some training and additional resources to organizations on the overall reporting. The program does have a very rigorous reporting structure, so ensuring that organizations really understand and have the mechanisms to, provide the necessary information is really important. And so a lot of the work in the last, month and a half has really been focused on just ramping up the program, bringing organizations on board, and ensuring that we have a very strong start.
So the expected outcomes of this initial phase of the project is we've expanded access to legal services by about 500 additional cases, as you might know, and we shared with you when we were working together to create this program and fill a need. About 66 to 68% of individuals in removal proceedings do not have legal representation. So by expanding the capacity by 500 out of the maybe 4,000 that are usually detained and put into these proceedings in the region, we're making a significant impact. Despite that, there are still unmet needs. Our initial partnership was to raise an estimated $10 million to meet the needs and have the maximum number of impact. As we've shared, we were able to raise $7.4 million, so there is a $2.6 million gap to that goal that I think are still represent some funding that could meet some additional needs, which currently we've identified as continuing to strengthen our removal defense pipeline and increase access to legal representation by really building up small to mid-size nonprofit legal service providers. This round was fairly rigorous. We have a pretty high bar as far as who we were going to enlist to help increase access to legal representation. But as we've learned, there's a huge need in expanding that. And so by being able to start to build the strength of some of these smaller mid-sized orgs, we're preparing for additional growth. And then the other piece is that removal defense is a very complicated area of the legal profession, and representing someone in removal proceedings is, as I've learned from, I'm not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV, but I've learned from colleagues and partners that it's really an art form and takes a lot. So there's a huge need for training, mentorship, and technical assistance of a lot of these nonprofit providers to become more effective and, more importantly, more efficient and be able to take on more cases. So just wanted to share that despite we have great success and it looks like a trajectory for impact, there are some unmet needs where if there is an ability to continue to partner and identify resources, we'd provide strong recommendations to focus and try to see if we can meet those. And now we conclude our presentation and would entertain any questions.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much for the update. So if I follow the proposed timeline of the budget in terms of the city's contribution to the fund, you should have already received $1 million. So you should have received $500,000 by July 15th of last year. I believe you should have received another $500,000 by January 1st of this year. Is that correct? So can you describe what's been done with the funds that you've received so far?
Yes, so as we shared, all the $7.4 million has been granted out to the selected 16 nonprofit organizations. All the funding partners also agreed to cover a portion of the evaluation, so that includes Vera's work for the data collection. So a portion of those resources were also allocated for that. And then, so CCF, the way that the funding structure is set up is we have, as you can see, we have a very rigorous reporting schedule and timeline here for grantees. It's critical for organizations to have resources in the front end to do the services. So we went ahead and divided all grant payments in over the next 2 years in 6-month increments. So organizations received an initial payment as soon as they signed their grantee agreement. And every 6 months, so long as they submit all the necessary data and reporting information to the LA Justice Fund, we will be releasing payments on in every 6-month increments.
Would you say that the $1 million you've already received, is it going towards training the providers, or is it already people actually using the money for legal representation?
Legal representation.
Yes.
So the money as prescribed right now, which is why we highlighted the unmet need, is we are requiring them, it's not for you to train, it's for literally case by case.
Got it. Yes. That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, so the $1 million has been completely encumbered. It's in grant agreements. It'll flow out contingent on them meeting what they've agreed to do. And also important note that CCF, we've literally just been a manager and are covering that.
Okay, that was going to be my next question, is whether the foundation is getting grantees ready to actually service people.
Yes.
Having attorneys ready to actually see clients. That's already happened.
Yeah, each organization is expanding their work. In some cases have added attorneys. In other cases have been able to bolster and add additional support for those attorneys so then they can free up and take on more cases.
So yeah, and a lot of organizations really are really in that process of ramping up services. There's been a lot of competition and limited, attorneys also that are available with the expertise. So, but a lot of organizations have, since receiving the funds, been moving quickly to ramp up. One of the things I'll share too is in terms of the where philanthropic dollars are helping to also support is filling gaps. Where, for example, one of the great things that we've seen from the organizations that are working is that they have a very strong a lot of strong collaboration. And one of the things, so for example, or the challenges they've raised is just having access to the Adelanto Detention Center because of the distance. So organizations have been very creative and have been identified an office space near the Adelanto Center to give attorneys easy access. And a lot of that is in coordination and collaboration between, the organizations. So they're definitely working very closely to also ensure that they're efficiently using all the resources.
And to reiterate, it's that facility, that collaboration is being facilitated with philanthropic dollars so that no public dollars are being used for rental or any type of overhead, and it's being dedicated only to legal services.
Yes.
Okay, great. I have two more questions, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
Do you know if you've actually granted a grant aimed at preventing ICE arrest, other than training programs for or education, distribution of knowing your rights cards? Are you actually providing, any of your grantees actually providing any assistance to prevent ICE arrest?
So none of the LA Justice Fund grants or allow organizations to use the money for that. California Community Foundation, through our own discretionary grant making, also does not dedicate very much to that specific piece, but we did. We have invested over $1 million in support, as others foundations have as well, around increasing Know Your Rights trainings, materials, and specifically supporting advocacy efforts.
Though? I know there's never enough money, but is that an area where there perhaps is a gap that we should be preventing the ICE arrest, as opposed to, I mean, the training and the knowing your rights cards are great, but how do we prevent some of the arrests to begin with? Is that an area that?
Well, it's an area that we see by supporting our advocacy organizations to work with government to really find policy solutions. We don't know that the nonprofits themselves can prevent those arrests, but short of supporting things like the, I'm blanking out on the network, the Rapid Response Network, which is aimed at providing rapid response for detention when there are worksite raids or whatnot. Short of doing deployment, things like that, I don't know that nonprofits really have the jurisdiction to prevent arrests.
And the one thing I will also just add is that one of the effective strategies we've seen that organizations are deploying is providing legal screenings. So doing as part of the Know Your Rights workshops, many organizations are also integrating legal screenings because, many times it's very difficult, right? Immigration policy is very complex. And so in order for an individual to really assess and understand their situation, they have to, be able to speak to a trusted legal attorney that can give them guidance in terms of where they stand and what options they may have. And so I know that a lot of organizations are really trying to push for legal screenings, and it's a very effective strategy because once they do the legal screening, many times they find about 10 to even up to maybe 20% of the screened individuals may qualify for some form of immigration relief, but the only way to find out is to do an actual screening.
I find that to be true, especially I'm trying to work on training our folks to answer our sexual harassment hotlines and making sure that when a victim is assaulted, that crime is reported, but at the same time that person on the other side on the other line understands the immigration issues and can best advise the victim. So I don't know if there's a role for you to play there, but it's very complicated. And oftentimes victims, for fear of being deported, don't report their crimes, but you have people committing assaults and rapes running around, continuing to attack and victimize people. And unfortunately, we just need to get the resources to the nonprofits that are advising, especially in this area. It's a difficult one.
And there is still an ongoing need to continue to support just engagement, information, and education activities. One of the most critical reasons, one is not just on Know Your Rights, the screenings piece, as Rosie mentioned, we found in supporting the DACA work that about 26% of individuals who were showing up to sign up for DACA actually were eligible and had been eligible for other more permanent forms of relief. But without those screenings, you don't know, and people just assume that they're not eligible. And I think the last most critical piece on why investing on Know Your Rights and information infrastructure is critical is one of the most serious threats to our immigrant communities and I think entire city of Los Angeles is the 2020 census. There is widespread fear and intent to encourage immigrant communities to potentially not participate in the census, or the communities themselves to be afraid of participating in the census. Having worked on it in 2010, I remember in the East Coast, clergy actually telling people not to fill out their census form, and there had to be counters to that and a lot of information. So if we're going to beef anything up, there are a lot of reasons why you would want to support more of the engagement, know your rights and information, because by the time we hit 2020, if the community's not informed, we're going to have a massive undercount in LA, especially of immigrant communities and their kids.
And the last question I have, Mr. Chair, is, are any of the grantees that you funded, do you know if any of them are conducting vigorous and robust bond hearings aimed at getting people released after they are taken into custody so that they can, their deportation hearing can be delayed 1 to 2 years? Is anyone specifically working on that?
I mean, all the removal defense providers are, that it definitely will be part of the legal representation, the spectrum of different services that organizations are going to be providing. I think in terms of the impact that LA Justice Fund will have, we will really begin to see that by June in terms of because a lot of organizations have definitely begun to take in clients, are doing the screenings, but we have yet to receive their first report. So I think that as soon as we start receiving and collecting the data, we're going to have a better understanding and assessment in terms of, the overall work that's taking place. But overall, we do understand that organizations have been, working on that, and that's something, and that's why, it's such a selected group of organizations that have that type of expertise, and
but
one
in
thing.
Part of your 17 providers, we have folks that are that have that expertise. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And the one thing just to also share is that of the, for the LA Justice Fund received a total of 38 applications, and there were 16 that were funded for the legal services, plus Vera, who's doing the evaluation. There's definitely a strong pool of additional organizations that, would benefit, that with some additional resources can help to amplify and strengthen the removal defense work. So I think also in looking at strategies, there's definitely a lot of opportunity to continue to build a pipeline of organizations doing this work. Many of them are already doing robust legal services around citizenship, DACA, and are also working towards removal defense. So I think some are almost there, but just definitely with some additional resources can help them. And so one of the things that we're looking at as part of the building the capacity is looking how to continue to support these organizations so that they can ultimately, be, potential partners.
Okay, that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Price, you've been a very generous supporter of many of the organizations that receive grants.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate your leadership on this issue. And thanks for the discussion about the Justice Fund. This is an exciting development, and in fact was the inspiration for the fund we created in CD9, working closely with two organizations, Chirla and Carecen, again providing legal services that you've been modeling, and we appreciate it. Is there any national precedent for this kind of fund? What's happening in other states around the country, other cities around the country?
I will tell you that even just in California, there's about 11 other initiatives that are similar to this. I think what's unique about this 11, including the Justice Fund, is the public-private kind of integration to the partnerships. New York's been doing it for a while, and they've been expanding that, and a couple other places have as well, but not with the public-private element to it and sort of the cohort and training pieces that we're doing as well.
Yes. Yeah, no, and I would just add that. So Vera, one of the great benefits we also have of partnering with an organization like Vera that has such renowned just expertise and background in this work is they're also managing a national collaborative called the Safe Cities Network. So they're working with jurisdictions across the U.S. that are launching similar programs. There's definitely no one size fits all, so they all range in different models. But I think we're seeing a trend, and there's momentum and a lot of interest to also learn and how to create these public-private partnerships in other regions. So Santa Ana also recently created a program. I know the city of Long Beach is exploring, and you know, there's definitely, I think, a momentum that's growing.
Right. And so how many individuals would you say we've helped, we've assisted through the organizational efforts to date? Any idea how many?
We haven't received, because the grants just went out, the reporting just got established, we haven't received actual report backs. Our estimate and what we were sharing is based on the grant agreements that we're looking on a conservative side, maybe about 500, on a optimistic side, about
That's on a quarterly
700
basis.
additional cases. Yeah.
Okay, good. And as those numbers come in, I think it would be helpful to kind of know where the help is going. And so if we can get a breakdown by district as to where the individuals are from, I think
we'll be able to, on a quarterly basis, provide reports on that activity, not just on a total gross number, but kind of where are those areas, what are we learning, and certainly we'll have the robustness in the data reporting piece to be able to provide more district individual level data when possible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Rue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the story report. This is great. I mean, this is what we've been looking for a long time. Just a quick question. So the entire $10 million has already been allocated?
7.4 million.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a gap of 2.6 that we want to raise more for.
Right. But that hasn't been accounted for yet. So if we raise $2.6 million more, then you'll go through another RFP type process.
Yeah, either another RFP or go back to the pool of unfunded organizations that met minimum qualifications but weren't at that high bar.
And basically the 16, 17 agencies, the money has been allocated or granted for various work, but not all, some of the money has been distributed,
Yes.
right? Yeah. And the work has just begun?
Yes.
Or when did it first begin, or?
So the actual grant agreements went out, I believe November 27 is the date we have. That's when the announcement went out. And then, from that, immediately about a week or two later, we convened the organizations to, right now, because we want to ensure organizations really understand the reporting requirements, the eligibility criteria, we've been briefing organizations to ensure that everybody has, we have an equal start. And so we've just been finalizing the database for the LA Justice Fund. So that is now beginning. Organizations will begin to report on data in February.
In February. So.
Yes. So they received their initial payments as soon as in November when they signed their agreement.
And you just preempted my next question. I know you have an extensive reporting. So the first data sets you'll get or report backs will be February.
Yes.
So in a couple of weeks. So it'll be great if you could. I'm sure you'll share that information with our offices, and you'll publicly share that elsewhere as well, I assume. So the remainder of the 2.6 unmet need, that should come from that was the portion from the private sector?
No, that's combined with the current, for lack of a better word, investors, city, county, Weingart California Community Foundation. Our matching contributions totaled up to 7.4.
10.4.
So the 2.6 would be either re-ups from the current investors or new philanthropic organizations or other entities that might want to put money into the program.
Great. I am very much looking forward to that report, and and please share that with us, because we want to let all the immigrant communities know and advocates know that we are doing this. Oh, one last question I wanted to ask. So what the money can and can't be used for? Can it be used for bail for detaining, or
no.
That wasn't specific? It can't?
It can't be used for bail.
Okay, so it could be used for any kind of legal services to help, but not bail.
Yeah, it could be used in providing the legal services to get you through the bond hearing and do all that work, but not to actually post it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Congratulations. It's a real pleasure to work with you, and I thank you for your organization for stepping up, providing leadership on this matter. I want to ask you if you have the specific amounts, and would you be able at some point to report the specific amounts of the grants to this committee?
We do. Yes, we can provide that.
Okay. I also am interested in knowing how many appeals from the other 16, 17 organizations that were not granted grants, how many appeals that you've received?
So we've circled back with all organizations that applied to notify them, and some, CCF has been and supporting through our Immigrant Integration Discretionary Fund, and so we do plan to see how we can support an additional subset of organizations just in general with some core support for their ongoing immigration work. I think that a lot will depend on our fundraising efforts and how we can bring additional resources. So, for example, right now we might potentially have an opportunity to fund some of additional training that organizations might need. It will not be enough, but it will begin to at least set a foundation for support for these groups.
But we as part of our re-granting process, because we speak and inform each individual applicant of where things are at, why it was not provided, we don't have a formal appeal process.
What, speaking of the fundraising, talk to me about the role of the state. We have the Speaker of Los Angeles lives in Southern California. The President Pro Tem is very outspoken on this matter. They've just gone through a budget. They have a budget surplus. We hear a lot from their leadership and also from the chair of the Latino Caucus. What resources have we sought to access from the state of California?
We communicate closely and coordinate well with Department of Health and Human Services through their One California program, also with the the governor's office on immigrant affairs, Dan Torres. We didn't seek any formal direct investment into the Justice Fund, but know that through our coordination, they also are supporting a number of these organizations for similar work as well. But they are not passing their money through LA Justice Fund, but independently granting based on their own requirements.
Might that not be more effective to have one organization managing that pool of resources?
It might be, and certainly a conversation worth having.
Okay. Talk to me about the measure of Santa Ana's commitment. I heard you say that they're committed to creating their own fund. How much money have they put up on this?
They started with a $200,000 investment, I believe.
The innovative thing about Santa Ana, which is something to explore and we've talked about at the Justice Fund, is they're actually looking to make this some sort of JPA type of agreement with some of the neighboring cities to sort of pool and maybe increase their funds, which is, if we're thinking about this regionally in LA County and the 88 other cities who may not have the capacity to actually create a justice fund, being able to invest into this already existing infrastructure might be a way for them to engage and a way for us to fill that $2.6 million gap. We would love to work with the council and other leaders here in the city to see how we maybe outreach and identify potential partners.
Yeah, we have heard that the city of Long Beach is exploring possible interest in this as well.
You've got a whole slew of cities in the Southeast Corridor with a robust immigrant population.
One of the most densest
in the country. It seems like while they are part of the county of Los Angeles and part of the 90 cities of the county, that individually that they may also participate. Shouldn't we pursue them as a funding source to help meet the initial goal of $10 million?
Yeah, and we'd love to work with the city and the county to maybe develop a vehicle that allows them to do that. I think whether it's a memorandum of understanding or some sort of vehicle that could then help them appropriate money into the fund.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate your work, but we've got a lot of work to do. You indicated that we've done maybe 500 cases or casework. We're catching people at the end of the process, the removal process. 500 out of 4,000 represents about 12%. That means we have an unmet need of 78%. Actually, 10 million would meet our initial goal, but for us to meet the entire 78% at that rate would be a need for another, we'd have to get up to $45 million if we were going to do that. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, and build the capacity and enough attorneys to actually take on all those cases as well, which is important. Just to clarify, so the 4,000 that go into these proceedings, it's about 66% of that doesn't have representation. We're talking about maybe 2,600. So if you say 500 more of that 2,600, it's a pretty good impact, but absolutely does not meet the need, and we need to do more. I want to thank this body and the entire council and mayor's office for their commitment and willingness to partner with us and allow us to work with you on this initiative. Look forward to more.
Perfect segue to item number 2. I thank you guys. I look forward to having conversations. I look forward to your report on the per unit allotment and the participants. Thank you.
Item number 2 is a chief legislative analyst to report relative to council's instruction to explore an amendment to the existing contract with California Community Foundation, incorporating an additional task to create a letters of representation program or other alternatives.
Sir, thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. Felipe Chavez with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. On January 19th, the City Council instructed our office to explore the feasibility of amending the contract with the California Community Foundation to create a pilot program in Council Districts 1, 6, and 10, where participating private attorneys would issue letters of representation to individuals at risk of deportation and would provide actual representation in cases where such individuals were arrested. Our office subsequently met with staff from the California Community Foundation who expressed concerns similar to those previously expressed by other immigrant rights organizations and indicated that an amendment would not be feasible at this time. We have been working with your offices on this issue, and we believe that if the committee wishes to continue to explore this issue, our office can prepare a request for proposals tailored to that initial request, where an organization or organizations may be selected to administer a program where private attorneys would issue letters of representation to individuals who are at risk of deportation, with a guarantee that if such individuals were to be arrested, the attorney would provide actual representation during any court hearings. Alternatively, if the committee or the council wish to go beyond just providing the letters of representation, we can prepare an RFP-seeking organization that would provide legal assistance for individuals who seek legal consultation, including intake, screening, assessment, and retention of an immigration attorney, which may lead to what was referred to as a G-28 form, which legitimizes the legal representation on immigration-related matters. And lastly, we can also consider any additional proposals made by this committee.
Yeah, Mr. Shea, can you please join us at the table? You know, I'm obviously the measure of our support for this program, the Justice Fund, is what it is. It's quite evident. But I'm also concerned about the efficacy. We talked about 500, 600, 700 immigrants being supported by the fund. even if we were to maximize the funding, it would be $50 million for 4,000, more or less, immigrants. I'm just concerned about the efficacy, the efficiency, the ability for us to protect this area that has the largest concentration of immigrants in, I guess, perhaps the nation. And so I'm interested, Mr. Shea, in the proposal that you have and how you envision this happening, its effectiveness and the efficacy of building a movement that defends immigrants and focuses on empowerment and self-reliance as part of this collective effort that we all are committed to.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your work.
Mr. Shea, can you put the mic a little closer to your...
Sure. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, I obviously support, and for several decades, have been involved in trying to extend to the maximum extent possible the availability of representation to low-income people in deportation hearings. That's obviously critical for those people. That's a life and death situation. They can be deprived of all that makes life worth living if deported, especially if separated from family members. So there's no disagreement on that front. And in fact, I think the city and the state and the California Community Foundation and the community-based organizations need to all intensify the work that they're doing to prevent deportations of long-term residents and people who have some remedy that's available to them in these removal proceedings, etc. And I know there's a big debate here and in other cities about universal representation and who would be represented, who would not be represented in removal hearings. However, I have a slightly different vision when it comes to universal representation. You know, my vision of universal representation is that it starts long before the person's arrested. You know, I've had some private clients as well as the great majority of work I do with the Center for Human Rights. Those private clients pay lawyers for protection long before they get arrested. And those private clients, if I have a private client, paying client, we prepare all the documentation in case the person ever does get arrested. So that not only do we do everything possible to prevent the arrest in the first place, but secondly, should the person get arrested, we're prepared to do a bond hearing within a week as opposed to the 6 weeks. So I think universal representation for low-income immigrants, the most vulnerable immigrants, certainly including the DACA folks, TPS folks, who are now looking at a short fuse. We're going to have 2.5 million people shortly facing deportation. It's going to be a lot more than the people ICE is now getting from local law enforcement agencies. So we have a very serious problem around the corner. Many people have a very serious problem this minute. And I think the solution starts with long before the arrest. Now, I don't, not dotted all the I's. We're still in discussions. Some groups find that not that exciting. Other groups find it exciting. And we're still getting input into how precisely. I've met with several of you to discuss how that could be implemented. This Saturday, we'll be meeting with a large group of Salvadoran groups and TPS groups to discuss how these things can be implemented for their communities. So we're not just discussing who's going to represent you if and when you ever get arrested and if and when you put in a deportation hearing. We're going to be talking also about how do you avoid arrest? How do you do these assessments to figure out who's here legally and or not who's here legally, but who's eligible to apply for something. How do you do those things in a way that maximizes self-empowerment and leadership development within those communities? So that's what we're thinking about. And to date, as I've shared with several of you, there are certain ideas. Precisely how we're going to implement them, I think we're still discussing. But there's certainly ideas that have largely emanated from discussions with the immigrant communities. Not with their priests, not with their lawyers, not with their therapists, but with the immigrant communities themselves. And what have those been? In discussions with immigrant communities, when we have said, what is the most important thing to you, including meetings with children, where you're saying, what's the most important thing to you with regards to your concern of your parents' status, U.S. citizen children, and DACA recipients, the number one thing is always not to get arrested. People are not stupid. They know that if they don't get arrested, they're never going to be in detention. If they're not in detention, they're never going to be in a deportation hearing. So people are not stupid. So we don't have all the answers, but we're certainly exploring what are some of the things that can be done to minimize the possibility of people being arrested in the first place. As one of the speakers said today, and he was very correct about this, and we need to recognize this, the majority of people today in ICE custody here in Los Angeles came through law enforcement agencies, and not LAPD, by the way, if you look into that. So that is important. What do? You need to have programs to drive home to the immigrant community just how important it is not to get entangled with law enforcement. You cannot just assume people kind of know that. I think you need an active program to tell people absolutely stay clear of law enforcement. That's your surest way to be arrested by the police. Now, everybody kind of knows that, but to actually fund and to create and to coordinate and to train people to do those kind of training programs, I think is significant. Why? Because 70%, 75% of people coming to ICE through law enforcement. And it's not people who've necessarily been convicted. It's people, like folks said today, just being arrested. Another thing that certainly LA City, and we've discussed this and should look at this in 2018, can do in order to minimize people getting into that law enforcement system and then get turned over to ICE is some decriminalization or policies where you don't necessarily arrest people and book people. That's another good idea. That sort of looks at how you avoid arrest. Another idea that we've had a lot of discussion about is, can you have representation letters? Because whatever anybody may say, we all know, and you can ask, you can meet with 1,000 immigrants and say to them, would you rather carry a Know Your Rights card, or would you rather carry a lawyer from a letter telling an ICE agent not to mess with you, that you're asserting your right to remain silent and to honor that? And 999 out of 1,000 immigrants would say, I'd rather have the lawyer's letter. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. So how precisely we accomplish that? Can we accomplish that? We're working on it. I think it can be accomplished. We've looked into the ethics of it, because that's a concern. Could a lawyer issue many of these letters? So we're looking into the mechanics of that. We're discussing it with both community-based groups, unions that are excited about the idea, as well as private bar associations. So we'll try to come up with a proposal for the city on that. A second aspect that I think is a gap, and I think the discussion was very informative from the folks from the California Community Foundation, but I think they were quite candid, and they made clear the thinking up to now has been about people in deportation hearings. So another thing is, and it wasn't addressed very clearly, and I think it's a big gap, is what if somebody is arrested? You go interview the same 1,000 immigrants and you say, if you're arrested, what's the most important thing to you? Not 1 in 1,000, maybe 1 in 1,000. We'll say, who's going to represent me in my deportation hearing? If one of your relatives gets arrested tomorrow by LAPD and goes to jail, and you get them on the phone, the last thing they're going to say is, who's going to represent me in my trial? No. The first thing anybody in custody wants to talk about is getting out of custody. That's the most important thing to the person. And it's critically important in the immigration context to a preparation of a defense. And more importantly, that person stays in custody their deportation hearing is going to come up very quickly. It's like a rocket docket. You can get that person out of custody. The deportation hearing gets put off for 2 years. They may not even need a city-funded attorney or an attorney funded by the California Community Foundation at that point, because they've gone back to work for 2 years. So a real focus on bail hearings. You asked about the state funding. I looked at this, and it's interesting. The state will give nonprofits $6,000 to represent somebody in custody, but only $1,500 to do a bond hearing. You couldn't even show up in court for $1,500 to do a bond hearing. Decent bond hearing takes 40 hours. Somebody needs to say, you know, we'll pay you $5,000 to do a decent bond hearing. A very significant number of people in custody are eligible for bond. A very significant, including folks who come through the criminal justice system but don't have serious convictions. So the guy gets pulled over for a parking thing or a traffic thing or some lightweight thing, gets turned over to ICE. That person is probably going to be eligible for release, including the collateral arrest people. So there's a large, significant population that's eligible for release, and they shouldn't be sitting in custody just because they're poor people. You know, middle-class people would get out of custody. Rich people would get out of custody. We need a real focus, number one, on preventing arrest. But for some people are going to get arrested. Then fine, we need a real focus. We can't say, here's $1,500 to do a bond hearing. Nobody's going to do a serious bond hearing for $1,500. And then, yeah, you're going to end up with a lot of people in custody that you're paying to do deportation hearings. So I'm saying there's tweaks that are needed in terms of bond hearing. And I'll just wrap up with this because you can go on and on forever about this. In terms of the self-empowerment and the bond hearings, you don't want to wait for somebody to be arrested to prepare for a bond hearing. We could have, in the 3 districts we've discussed, we could have a model program where immigrants are collecting the documents they will need if they ever get arrested. There's about 20, 30 documents you want to collect for a bond hearing. It takes at least 4 or 5 weeks to gather those documents. I would have everybody gathering those documents with, it's self-empowerment. They're doing most of the work, but you know what? In the end, they're doing most of the work that'll be needed to get them out of custody within a week or 2 weeks, not 6 or 8 weeks, should they ever be arrested. So in wrapping up, I think I admire the work we're doing. I think the work that Ed is being doing for people in custody is critically important. But I think a little bit we've kind of missed the boat when it comes to actions, policies, funding, resources, training, leadership development, and self-empowerment that we could be doing in the whole realm prior to somebody being in a deportation hearing. And in the end, that's when I think we could proudly say that we have truly dedicated ourselves to a model of universal representation. So that's my thoughts on the matter.
Colleagues? Any comments, questions?
Mr. Shea, so in the report there are three recommendations, right? Basically, that's what you're proposing, 3 recommendations as to how to move forward with this item?
Well,
the way it reads, yeah, I see.
You're referring to, yes, you're referring to the notes. We're basically recommending or offering as options either to have our office prepare a request for proposals that would basically solicit providers to create a program where they would recruit attorneys to issue letters of representation the way the committee requested it. A second option, which is number 2 on your document, would be to issue an RFP that includes more than just the letter of representation, but also includes intake, assessment,
and screening.
And screening, correct.
Which is how to complete the G28
Which
form.
could lead to completion of the G28
Do you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Shea?
you know, I, I clearly think we need a little bit more time to think about it, but I do. I admire the efforts that are currently underway to assess folks. And the state funds that, the California Community Foundation funds that. There's funding available. And there are organizations, small and large, well-known, less well-known, throughout Los Angeles that for decades, ever since I moved here a long time ago, have been doing precisely that, assessing people, etc. So I definitely support that, and I think that should be part of sort of a pre-arrest program. However, I also think, and I just think we need a little bit more discussion about this, I also think that we need to think bigger now, because we're not just talking, I mean, we had to think big even before, but before we had a threat that President Trump was going to go out and arrest 10 million people and deport them. Nobody really believed that. But now it is becoming a reality, because unless we can take some strong steps, at the end of this first 4 years of the Trump administration, the net result that we will see with regards to immigration policy is an additional 2.5 million undocumented people living in the United States, the largest number probably being in Los Angeles, because the federal government has delegalized all these populations. So now we're looking at a more urgent situation with TPS termination, with DACA termination, with extreme vetting on all kinds of applications that are slowing down the legalization process for all manner of people, extreme vetting on asylum cases. So the whole policy is resulting in more and more, and will result in more and more people becoming undocumented, which is probably part of their game plan. In fact, the long-term game plan is probably also voter suppression, if you want to look at it from the long way. So we have to start thinking about how do we reach larger numbers of people, because that's the nature of the challenge we face now. And so I'm not convinced. I totally agree with the with the assessment concept. Should be part of a pre-arrest program, really. I mean, you don't want to be sitting in a jail cell assessing somebody. You want to be assessing their eligibility for benefit long before they get arrested. But the one twist that I would throw into that is, couldn't we create a self-assessment tool that 50,000 or 100,000 TPSs could do, as opposed to the 2,000 we're able to get into personal interviews? So is it possible to have a preliminary assessment tool? And again, I hearken back to our failure to use technology. There are a lot of intelligent immigrants who are using computers. They well know how to use a computer. They know how to use an app, et cetera, et cetera. There are multiple ways to get information out to folks, even if it's through your district offices on a piece of paper, plus a website, plus a Facebook page, plus a phone app, plus this or that, the other thing, so that people could do an initial self-assessment. That way you could potentially have 50,000 people in LA doing an initial self-assessment. They're not going to give themselves green cards, but you could do that with a lot more people than you're kind of walking into 16 nonprofits that are funded by you guys. So can we do that? Can we use technology to begin to deal with the challenges that folks are facing now? And I think we can, because I have a lot of faith in this community. And fine, maybe the 65-year-old grandmother doesn't use an app, but you know what? Her grandson does, and her grandson will help, because the grandson's part of the family, and the grandson's heard that the city of LA has an initial self-assessment app. From that, you could probably get an 80% accurate assessment. Wow, this person looks pretty eligible for a U visa. Victim of violent crime, reported it to the police, and went to see a doctor. That's 3 simple yes or no questions that could be put in a self-assessment form. Same thing with the other forms of eligibility. So I do think the assessment thing is extremely important. You want to legalize as many people, as was mentioned earlier, as many as 20% of DACA people are probably eligible for something. but you want to use technology, and you want to develop self-empowerment. People are not idiots. Immigrants are smart people. They're bright. They're creative. They can go through a they go through more complicated things every day of the week, believe me. They can go through a self-assessment. We could assess a far greater number of people, and from there kind of figure out, well, fine, if you have you're from El Salvador and you want to seek asylum, maybe we'd say, here are the 4 groups you need to go to. Oh, you were the victim of a serious crime, you reported to police. These are the 3 nonprofits we're going to refer you to. It'd be a far more efficient way to reach out to a much larger number of people, and it involves those people themselves in the process.
Well, members, I think we can all agree that we want to make sure that the program is effective, and it really provides our immigrant community with the real sense that they can defend themselves against an ICE agent. How we're going to get there seems to be more complicated. But I like the second recommendation of how to get us to perhaps that G28 form, which ultimately gives you legal representation. So I wouldn't be opposed to that option, and continue the item in committee until we figure out how to work out the kinks. But are there any other recommendations coming from the California Community Foundation that they recommend? And is there anything you want to add to this? Or I don't want to put you on the spot. If you don't, that's fine. You can decline. But perhaps in your conversations, anything they're recommending to make this program more effective?
So in my conversations with the California Community Foundation, some of the issues that were raised were basically that the focus of the current RFP was on people who are on detention. So therefore, there's there's many individuals who are not in detention at this time who also need services. They identified assessment and pre-screening as one of the priorities to fund. They also expressed that, with the changing national policies, there's now a need to represent individuals from DACA and TPS.
So
They've now joined us at the table.
The pool is growing and the money is shrinking.
Yes.
I think with regard to working out the kinks and exploring this further, we're happy to be a resource in terms of looking at app and technology. We have a standing immigrant integration task force that actually convenes about 70 to 80 organizations on a monthly basis, and have, through our other work in citizenship and with admin relief, looked at and partnered with organizations building different apps and looking at screening mechanisms. So we're happy to be a resource to Mr. Shea and to the committee in sharing any of that as well as you all explore this further. But finally, and it sounds like we're in this direction, do recommend, at least in the initial course of the Justice Fund, letting it mature, keep its focus, and definitely would still say there is an unmet need, and I think there's some strengthening to do, as I think we all agree. We got to take care of that representation piece. And we'll also, because of the discussion on seeking bonds and trying to get folks out, we'll do a survey of the current 16 grantees to ask them specifically, to what extent is this part of your representation strategy and initial kind of intake with folks, and can provide that back to the committee.
On that, I think it'd be really interesting to look into, because the point I was trying to make earlier was about those bond hearings, was when the state gives a nonprofit, local nonprofit, again, these are all around the state, obviously, but a bunch of them are here in Los Angeles. When they give $1,500, it's minimal. It's really, and I think what that probably does is to discourage. If I was running a big nonprofit and that's my job, to keep this nonprofit going and to make sure the income and the expenses are kind of all balanced, and I'm only getting $1,500 to do a bond hearing, I'm going to somehow, my bond hearings, my lawyers are probably going to go in and do a 4 or 5 hour bond hearing, because that's what I'm being supported for. Now, if they're getting $6,500 to do the deportation hearing, they'll put 6 times much more time into that. So it would be interesting to find out, and I'm doing the same thing as I'm meeting with groups, talking to them, but also for you to try to find out, well, fine, you doing bond hearings, but what is the actual dedication of time to those? And what's your success rate? Again, because we could do 100% bond hearings, but if we're not doing them seriously and robustly, we could land up with 80% of the people we could be getting out staying in custody, and then sure, depleting your funds because they're a high priority to get represented because they're in custody. So that, I think, would be interesting to have sort of that level of understanding. And we can certainly keep working with the legislative folks who work for you, and with each of you, and with the communities. This Saturday we'll be meeting with folks. Next week we'll be meeting with union folks, and I'll keep the committee advised so that if one or more of you are interested in popping into one of those meetings, folks there would welcome that, to get your thoughts on the situation, about the limits on city support. But at the same time, I will be exploring with those folks, as I have been doing and will continue to do, and what is their view of how the city could help? What do they think the city should be doing? But we're really having two discussions. For those who've seen the agenda for Saturday, it's two discussions. One is, what do you think the city could be doing? And two is just, what do you think you can be doing? Which is the self-empowerment sort of part.
Mr. Shea, thank you for your tireless efforts on behalf of our committee and the city and the immigrant community, and your decades of service. I think it's clear that this committee started off with a focus on representation, and we did not focus on prevention, decriminalization, bond preparation, etc., a whole range. And I think there's a tremendous need for that. I will speak for my district. That is a concern for me. Various groups that were not funded, that have a rich and long history, advocating for immigrants that were not supported. We will continue that conversation. I look forward to seeing you Saturday morning at this meeting as we continue to move forward during a very perilous time period in this nation. I thank you for your service and for what you will continue to do for us. Colleagues, are you prepared to continue the item?
To continue the item in committee,
Yes.
I think, Mr. Shea, I know you're in high demand, but I like the recommendation from the California Community Foundation to be of service to us and help us guide us in this way. But I also wouldn't be opposed to looking into a request for a proposal for the provision of immigration services to individuals who go through an intake screening and assessment process to complete that Form G28 to retain immigration representation. So if that is an easier way to get to helping more people, I wouldn't be opposed to that. Why that's happening, I don't.
Mr. Price.
Yeah, I second that. I think we should be doing as much as we can to try to provide the assistance on as many different levels as possible. As you said, Mr. Shea, we've got to think big. We got to think big. And I know it's somewhat uncharted territory, but I think we got to stake out some positions, and I think this is an opportunity for us to do that. And so I would support that as well.
Mr. Rue, any closing comments, sir? Okay.
Sir, just one clarification for the record.
Yes.
When you reference three options, that's in reference to your verbal report, correct?
It's two options in my verbal report, yes.
Okay. No, I have three. I don't know what
in the written report.
Oh, your written report?
There's
Yes.
three options in his verbal.
I only mentioned two.
You only verbally mentioned two?
Correct.
Is that what you're referring to? Okay. You don't want it verbally mentioned the third?
Sure. The third option that's included in the report that Ms. Nuri is referencing is an option to issue an RFP to provide consultation services only.
Okay. All right. With that, I think we're prepared to continue the item. Obviously, 3 of the districts here have a keen interest in going beyond what this committee has been doing, and may engage in their own self-help in terms of funding and working with other entities in our districts. And so we'll continue to move forward. I think we continue the item, and thank you for your evaluation and presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That cleared the item, the desk? Okay. With that, clears the agenda, and the meeting is adjourned. I thank you very much, everybody, for being here.